Well, that was great. Thank you. So we will discuss a little bit about, what was it? Mixed, augmented, or something reality. A bit more why I think the medium is not perfect yet, and yet why you should still pay attention. So quickly, the short journey will be actually, who am I? Why do I care so much about virtual, augmented reality, extended, all this thing? Some good examples, in my opinion, examples that are meaningful, important, who actually work really well. We'll pick one example and dissect it to see how it's actually working, what's the magic behind it, and then what's the difference with augmented reality, and what you should do or not on the topic. So who am I? So I work for the European Parliament. I think nobody knows about it, but the European Parliament has an innovation lab where basically we try stuff. 2 days ago, I was having my shower, and then I thought, what's a good analogy for it? So I think the best analogy is that when you're really bored, you're traveling, and then you switch to a channel where they're only trying to sell you stuff. You know, it's not ads, it's like they're trying to show you a product that can solve your life, like a kind of broom. It's also like a remote for the TV. That's also, I don't know, it can do a microwave, all this kind of stuff. So in theory, according to the presentation, it's amazing. And you try it, it does none of those things. So a lot of tech, a lot of presentations are amazing, but then you try the actual thing, the actual headset, it's like, it's okay, but it's not that great. So we evaluate those technology, and if they're actually working well, if they are meaningful, then we say, well, is it actually dangerous? Should we regulate about it? So that's how we do. We do it practically using proof of concept and demonstration. I also work for UNICEF. UNICEF has an innovation fund where the idea is we don't know everything, and we know a lot less about people on the ground and their problems. So if they can try to implement on their own with a proper understanding of the limitations in terms of access to the technology, access to the underlying infrastructure, then we give them the support, including money, to implement those for-profit projects. So that when it does work, hopefully, then it's the entire local ecosystem that goes forward, not some other company somewhere else. And then I contribute to Mozilla. That's why I'm here today, to explain you a little bit more. Well, the contrast is high. What is mixed augmented reality thing? So quick question. So who tried virtual, so that's a show of hands moment. So who tried virtual reality? Okay, about half. Who tried augmented reality? Okay, a bit less. Who developed anything in virtual reality? Okay. A little bit less. Who developed anything in augmented reality? Okay, more. Who did not develop, have a rough idea of how it could be done? Great. So there are quite a few who are still a little bit cautious about it. So why did I actually start this whole augmented mixed reality crazy thing? So I have a bunch of notes on pretty much anything. Not everything I do, but I don't know. Last time I went climbing or to the gym or swimming, but also ideas, like I read a book, I write notes about the book, and that gives me ideas for proof of concept, for anything and everything. And that becomes a little bit of a mess, like a little bit of everything everywhere. So I started to do a lot of different ways to organize it, like mind maps. But that doesn't, at least for me, it didn't scale. So I started to use a wiki, so I have like my mini Wikipedia, kind of. But the frustration becomes that everything is stuck behind a screen. Like this 2mm screen that's not how I envision me having ideas. It's like ideas everywhere. And that became quite frustrating. So I thought I'd put a VR headset 4 years ago, something like this. And I was like, wow, I could put my ideas everywhere. Because otherwise, it's actually taking my wiki, printing pages like this, and filling up my flat like this. And I would look a little bit like a crazy person, so I did not do that. Instead, I started to do this. So if we can turn the light off again, I don't know where it was. No, yes. So I have my little town, made of ideas, made out of notes. I'm not super proud of it, but it's mine. So to me, it's pretty precious. So that's one way I organize my mind. But VR can also be used for something that are a little bit more practical, less intangible. A couple of years ago, 2 years ago, I think, I don't know how, I forgot how that happened, but basically I got a lot of pain in my neck. And then I had to do physiotherapy. So I don't know if anybody of you did physiotherapy. It's pretty dull. It's pretty boring. But then if you don't do it, you're literally stuck. So I had to do my little exercises, super slowly, super boring. But I had to do it. And I thought, well, there is something else, a little device in my desk that knows everywhere, anytime when I'm moving my head. So I put a little episode of Rick and Morty on a virtual screen, and then it moved the way I was supposed to move my head. And then when I did not look at it, like you see the little yellow cursor on top of the virtual screen, then it paused. So I had to literally look at the episode in order to make it play. So again, maybe it's useless for anybody else. I don't think so, but at least for me, it was both fun and useful. So that's to say that those are personal examples, might not relate to you, but VR is not just for games. Of course it's for games, but there is so much more than that. Of course it's also for corporate training so that you have more skill, faster, better. But if you have anything else, anything personal, anything important to you, you can also implement that using VR or AR. So it's literally for what you make out of it. What you, but also what others. So as I mentioned, for UNICEF, I helped some startups. This was IDSys from Turkey. You got quite a few children in Turkey that get beaten, and then they don't go out anymore. And if they don't go out anymore, they don't go to school. If they don't go to school anymore, then it's going to be difficult later on. So the idea is to gradually rehabilitate them, to give them a safe space, that they still consider the threat, but that when it's actually not overblown, or it's actually not a threat, that they can go gradually to something a more and more realistic scenario. I also went to Nigeria to help IMISI 3D. They were doing labs without labs. So I guess most of you learn chemistry in an actual physical lab. That's great. That's probably the best way. But if you don't actually have a lab, how can you still have some interaction, some way to grasp the material, not just read a book, not just something theoretical? Well, if you don't have a lab, you can try to make a virtual one. And then this lab can be used also for physics, nuclear physics, whatever else that is normally inaccessible. How many of you, actually, I didn't ask that, how many of you programmed in VR? Not programmed for VR, but put the headset and you code in it. 0, okay, I'll show you this. Yeah, I saw you like, wow, what is that? So you're in little, of course, it's pretty sweet environment. You can grab a 3D object, like you would normally do in VR, but then you can have your function. And I don't know if you tried MIT Scratch, where you have basically the geometry of the object, if they snap or not, represent the syntax. So if it doesn't, then it doesn't, if it sticks together. And then everything changes around you. It's like I learned a bit of accounting, programming, doing like a fake account for a bank or things like this. Well, now you can do it in VR, and then your entire world changes based on how you did it. So it's also literally for everybody, but it means if you have a specific community, like Kai, who is doing it for children in the US from an African American background, they can also learn this way, based on her content, based on what she believes is meaningful for them. So that's another reason why you need to appropriate the technology, so that you can make it relevant for you and those around you. Another something you probably, I hope, heard about before is using VR for empathy, using VR for journalism. Because if you were to know who the enemy is, would you still do what you have to do? Do you actually get another perspective, something that makes you reconsider what you have to do? Another little personal story, you knew about my neck. Now you can also know that when I was a kid, I had 2 eyes, one that was really going cross-eye. Luckily for me, I played a lot of Quake 3 and Warcraft 2, so that fixed it, kind of. But you can also, the beauty of VR is that you have 2 screens. You have 1 screen per eye, so you can measure if they are misaligned or not ideally aligned, and deliver exactly the right content per eye, and then eventually, gradually rehabilitate. So again, the whole point of those examples is that it's not just for games, it's not just for corporate training. You can do so much more than that with VR and AR. And finally, one last example, Mozilla Hubs, that we'll see also a little bit further. The idea is there is no content, you are the content. It's a social experience. And then instead of saying, well, this is the story, this is what's happening, it's like, let's get together, let's have a proper discussion, and let's benefit for a 3D environment you can shape together. So let's take that experience and take just the first second of it. So I don't think you can read that from the back, because even from here it's a little bit tricky. So what it does, so you're in the browser, obviously, and then you have a full 3D scene in your browser. It's loading A-frame. So who heard about A-frame before? Okay. A fourth of the... So A-frame is, let's say you need to write a scene with your 3D object and you need a cube, because that's my favorite object. Well, you just write a cube. So that's how simple it is. So if you've never done 3D before, I think that's the fastest way from being a web developer to playing, discovering VR and AR. But the beauty of it is it's relying on 3GS, which is basically the standard to do 3D on the web. And the beauty of 3GS is it's relying on WebGl. Meaning if you have a powerful GPU on your laptop, pretty noisy one, on your phone, pretty powerful one, then you get actually proper 3D content. The little trick is that you have two eyes. So this I hope most of you knew. But then those two eyes are not perfectly aligned. They're a little bit shifted. So it means you have one camera, and it's really hard. Just for the first row, you can see that the image here, the path doesn't go all the way, but here it does. So you have one camera that shows you what one eye should see, and the next one that's a little bit shifted that should show you what the other eye should see. The little problem also is that you make this beautiful 3D content, but then some people who are a little bit critical say that's great, but that's not state of the art in 3D. Like I have a demo of Unreal Engine, it doesn't look like this, it looks much neater. So the problem is Unreal Engine or Unity doing normal 3D, not VR, they are cheating a lot. They're showing you a 3D asset, and then if you look around, it's empty. There is nothing behind it. They put texture for your hand to see the little curves inside your hand, for the shape of the skin, but that's also fake. It's just like how the light is projected to it. But in VR, you cannot cheat like this. You cannot cheat because the person is going to move all around. They're going to stick their nose literally against your objects. So a lot of the techniques, let's call it technique instead of cheating, they don't apply in VR anymore. So it will take a little bit of time to go from state of the art in 3D to things that are a little bit less cartoonish, but it's coming. So now, who heard about pose? What's a pose? One person, great. So that's it. I'll just let you read the specifications. Okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to read it. It is important, but the specification can be a little bit, I mean, if you lack some sleep and you want to doze off, you can just, but it's important. But the first step is you actually ask your browser to give you a pose. So the pose you will ask to Firefox or Firefox Reality, straight from, by default, you have everything you need for VR. And then, because of course it didn't work, the browser is going to ask your headset. Oh. Like this one. It's a little bit of suspense, but it's going to be... If the backup link doesn't work, I can't do much. Oh. Yes. So thanks to Stefan here in the back. Little example. Oh. Little example. That's okay. So you have your headset with its two little cameras, no depth sensor, just traditional cameras. And then it's looking for what's called feature points, which are those little yellow dots there. So for example, here, if it's looking here, it's perfectly white or grayish. There is nothing interesting. If it's looked here, 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 it's exactly the same. But if you're here on the edge, for example, you have some white, some black, some contrast, some differences. So it can identify, oh, there is an interesting spot here. So if I have those, let's say, 3 interesting spots, they are here, here. We'll do a little quiz. So the headset sees those 3 little yellow dots. And now, he sees them like this. So where did it move? It was here before. Like this. So if I do like this, I'm back. So you can do this because you assume that the world is rigid, like not everything is a piece of clothes. And the camera can infer its position from enough feature points. So that's literally the magic behind VR and AR. If you have enough high quality cameras, and have feature points, then you can detect where you think you should be. And then you pass it all the way back. So the headset and its sensors pass it to the browser passes it to A-Frame or 3GS or another framework if you want. And then, not the trick, but the way that it makes it look so natural is you have your position in space, so the pose with its rotation and actually where it is, because as we saw before with the 3 points, we know if I'm backward or forward. And then you just attach it to your camera. So you have your 3D scenes, and instead of saying, hey, my camera is fixed, then my camera is the position of the headset and its rotation. That's basically all there is to it. The little demo, I'm going to skip it for now, but I'll be in the back, so you'll be able to try it yourself, even better. So it's the same. The thing is, honestly, just watching VR content, it's already amazing. It's mind-blowing. You feel you're somewhere else, blah, blah, blah. But it's not so fun if you cannot play with it. So it starts to be fun when you can actually grab object, throw object, draw in space, and all this. Especially drawing, because it's so natural. Like, I don't know if you try to use Blender or Maya. I mean, Blender is amazing, but it's a little bit steep. It's difficult. Like, when I say the cube is my favorite geometric object, it's maybe because I don't really have the skill to do something more complicated than this. Thing is, if you do it in VR, you just, I mean, I can move my hand in any way I want. It's just how smart your body is. You can move it like this and just paint or sculpt in 3D. So the trick is the same way you had a pose before. So I'll show you. But the headset, can you see the white dot on the controller? So it's all black on white. So the same way you had the yellow dots identified by the camera, then you identify those black and yellow dots, and you see how close or how far it is, and what's the rotation. So you get the pose also for the controller, so you know where it is relative to the headset. And then when you press the button, then you just use the gamepad API. So you just have all the information in terms of pressing button, axis, pressure, anything like this. And that gives you, in addition to, let's say, painting, some really natural interaction. That's one of the beauty really of VR is, honestly, being somewhere else is amazing, but having your hands, rather than just like typing on a keyboard or on a gamepad, but rather moving around freely, it's a completely different experience. So for example, the most basic yet interesting one is grabbing a duck to make it quack. That's just a random example. So you have your controller, your position in space, its rotation, and then you have the object, let's say a duck, and then you just measure the distance between the two. Luckily for you, if you forgot, like me, a bit of your basic math from a couple of years ago, 3GS got you back. You got some utility function that just measure the distance between the two vectors. So that gives you basically your little duck or cube, your little controller, you got its position, little position of the cubes. You compare the two. Let's say your distance is 1 centimeter, 1 meter, whatever you want it to be, and then you make it quack. So the problem is, hopefully now you got a rough idea on how VR works and how you could do a VR experience. So the problem is that's the easy part. The question after that comes how to make it right. How you can do it respecting privacy, respecting whatever you think is the right way to do it, and then having discussions about it. So luckily for me, because it's too hard, Diane is going to discuss about all this after. Thanks for that. What is this? The plug from the Matrix. So my personal opinion on this is, well, first, we're nowhere near. I mean, put the headset on after if you haven't tried it. I really recommend. Most of you think, if you haven't tried it, I know what VR is. Like, you put the headset, you're somewhere else. It's such a guttural experience, such a personal and intimate experience. Like, I want to stay polite, but you have no idea. It's really, you're somewhere else. But you know you're somewhere else still. Like, this is nowhere near the Matrix because, like, there is no heat, let's say. Where you touch an object, there is no texture to the object. So to go from being somewhere else to I cannot distinguish anymore reality when I'm conscious and I try to pay attention is completely different. But the thing is, in my opinion, it doesn't matter. That's not where the real issue is. The real issue is it's a social and individual psychological problem or challenge, rather, let's say. Is if you know or if you personally think you have an addictive behavior and you're not comfortable and you're trying to escape your daily life, well, maybe you shouldn't try VR. Or if you want to, maybe you should do it with the supervision of someone else who can judge if you're actually having a proper behavior or not. So it's a personal, an individual problem, but also a social one. So if we believe it is risky, then us as a society should pay attention on how it's being used. So something a bit easier, just a technical question. So what's the difference between virtual reality and augmented reality? Yeah.
Augmented reality, you put something on top of the video.
Yeah.
In virtual reality, you have like a screen and you don't see the video.
Exactly. So I'll just repeat a bit for people in the back, but in augmented reality, you add content on top of what you see. In virtual reality, everything is the content. Everything that is outside of the headset is hidden. So that's VR, where I don't see you anymore. And then if I have my tablet, my phone, my Magic Leap or HoloLens, then I can actually see that plus more. But what makes augmented reality interesting is actually when you get more than just adding content. Rather, when your computer and its camera and sensors can say, well, actually, that's the floor. Because then you can add objects on top of it, virtual chair or whatever you want it to be. Or, well, that's a chair. Because then I can add content on top of it, and I can say, well, maybe I should have a matching table. But the more information you have about the environment, the more meaningful, the more interesting the experience is. So it's a lot more than just adding content. It's having a rough understanding of reality around you in order to add content. So I still have a bit of time. Yeah, it's just to show how similar it is you have your camera and your pose, that's VR, and it's your camera and your pose, that's AR. So it's the same, except that one is opaque, the other is translucent. With, after that, all the computer vision to say, well, that's the ground, or that's a flat plane, or that's a chair. So let's see if we can do a little live demo. I'll try to briefly show you how it works. So I hope some of you are crossing your fingers, because usually that's the moment that's, oh, it might work. So that's also the moment when I hope no silly notification shows up. But of course, that's the moment also where it asks for permissions, and I read everything extremely carefully before, but that's a demo, and I have colleagues that are kind of telling me you don't have time for this, so I'll just press confirm, but you will read it. And then I can have already on the floor the 3D object that doesn't exist before, the little reticle. So show you a couple more things. You can see on top that you have a URL. So it is a browser, the Mozilla XR viewer for iOS. You can have feet also there. And the interesting point also is what I showed you before. So you can see all those little feature points, all the little yellow points, where the camera is able to say, well, this is interesting enough, and I can compare frame by frame, thus I can know where I am in space. So there are a lot more examples on the Mozilla XR viewer website. I invite you to try them. It's on the web, meaning you can do display source and see actually how it's done. And then once you know that, you can make your own page, tweak it, and that's it, you got started already. So that worked. So somebody already before asked me, what's the difference between virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality? So it is important to use terms correctly. But in my opinion, what matters is if you do something interesting with it. Of course, in order to have a proper conversation, you need to know those terms. But if you just know those terms to use them because it sounds cool, it's pointless. If you do something useful with it, then I think it's a lot more interesting. For something non-useful, I did this little prototype with a friend from Samsung Research where we control tucks via a robotic arm. So we have a copy or a digital twin of the robotic arm in VR, and then we can control in VR the robot's behavior, and then in real life impact back from the virtual world. So you can, virtual reality, augmented reality, extended reality, all that. As long as you do something useful, meaningful, I think that's what matters. So, all that said, why you should not try WebXR. So, candidly or honestly, honestly, if you need to deploy to all platforms tomorrow, no, good luck, but it's not going to work. Literally tomorrow, the support is growing, and everybody's on board in terms of W3C specifications, from Mozilla, obviously, to Apple, to Google, to Samsung, to Magic Leap, to more niche or professional hardware manufacturers. But it's taking a bit of time, because we believe it's going to change everything, so it has to be done right. If you don't care about 3D, I have friends who are just into fonts, and that's fine. You have so much to do in 3D, you need to think differently and have a notion of space and when you put objects, that if you are not excited by 3D, probably not. Or crazy interaction, new interaction, how to touch objects, grab objects, move them, throw them. All this is being figured out now, so if you don't want to play with those crazy interactions, maybe wait a little bit more. Or if you need a stable toolchain, like let's say you work at the European Parliament, or if you work for a nuclear power plant, maybe wait a little bit more still. That being said, why you should still invest time in learning WebXR tomorrow morning? Well, I mean, it works. Simple enough. You don't have to believe me. I know there are some skeptics. That's fair. So again, come during the break and even after, and just try it. You'll see. You just put the headset on. You're somewhere else. Simple as that. It's a new frontier, so I mean you have to be a little bit sadomasochistic because you need to learn things in flux, but I think it's really worth it. It's so exciting, like the bags under the eyes come from this. Also, and I think as importantly at least, is if you don't shape a new medium, who will? You cannot complain that it's being abused, it's not interesting, whatnot. Take part of it, propose something better, do something nicer, more interesting. That's, in my opinion, if there is a new medium, bless you, it has to be shaped by whatever you can do and what you want to do with it. The long sentence number 4 is basically, yeah, I don't know if everybody's going to use VR or AR in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. I actually don't know. But I think if some of us do, and more of us do, we need to understand how it's working, to understand what are the challenges in terms of privacy, ethically, in terms of how it's going to change our lives. And even if you don't use VR, that somebody brings a VR headset in your home, a AR headset, where are those information going? You need to understand a bit how it's done to say, well, actually, I don't want this. Well, I want it, but I want it done right. And yeah, if you have a cognitive science degree and you never know what to do with it, definitely that's the field for it. So, practically speaking, first step, don't buy the most expensive headset with a super fancy laptop. Just come try this evening. Try it, see what it is, see how you feel about it, and eventually say, well, not yet, not for me yet. Obviously, as I showed you, you can install the Mozilla XR viewer on your phone and start to play around, start to remix examples. Just Firefox, that you probably have already on the desktop. Just plug the headset, and it will work. Okay, might take 5 minutes, but the setup is really straightforward. And you can just use a bunch of examples on the web and to get something exciting going. You can also just come online and have a chat in VR. We have a bunch of events on Mozilla Hubs, so you can come without VR, but I mean, it's more fun and more, you feel there with the headset. And you feel also focused in the conversation. You're not checking your phones or yet another notification. You're in the moment with others. And as I mentioned a couple of times, remix examples. That in my opinion, that's the best way. Like if you were to learn, you have a delicious dish and you don't cook it, well, do it once. And eventually, well, if you don't like it, well, that's okay. But that's fighting with the medium. In my opinion, that's the nicest way to understand how it's working. And it's a lot of fun. So if you want to dig even deeper, well, you can contribute back. There are a lot of ways, from coding to documentation to just chatting around. And obviously, because it's in flux, because it's changing all the time, it means the documentation always needs helps. So if you're into MDN, contribute back. If you see a bug in Firefox Reality because it's still a new browser, well, first mention it. And if you have an idea, because it's open source, well, you can actually try to fix it yourself. If you want to understand those little yellow dots or white dots, how it's actually working, well, computer vision, I think that's one of the best way to understand how all those new technologies are coming through. And there are a lot of really fun, if you're into a design pattern for user experience, a lot of ways to interact. So there are already repository catalogs on those interactions, so you can explore those. And at least as importantly as the previous ones, make your own stuff. That's it. I'll just show you, I took a little 360 of Vienne before. Yes, it was just on the way. Took 30 seconds. I'll show you after. Ah, crash. That's part of the show. That's part of the show. Chill. That's it. So yeah, try stuff. Come after. See how it's done right. Also with the next one from Diane. And then yes, thank you so much. Slides on the QR code. Thank you.